What if the desperate cries of two little girls were the very spark that uncovered a hidden nightmare no one dared to face? Imagine a wounded mother clinging to hope with her last strength, while a loyal dog and a determined officer walked step by step into a darkness that others had turned away from. What they would find in that darkness was not only terrifying but unforgettable. Stay with me, tell us where you're watching from, and let yourself be pulled into the mystery that's about to unfold. Now, enjoy the story. The autumn wind in Ashwood, Montana carried more than just the bite of the coming cold. It carried the faint tang of pine needles drifting from the forests, mixed with the earthy scent of dry grass that spread over fields and hills beyond the small town. Ashwood was the kind of place where strangers were rare, where neighbors could list each other's birthdays, but where silence pressed down heavier than honesty. Secrets thrived here, buried under polite nods and closed doors. At the very end of a cracked, forgotten road stood a lonely wooden house. Its white paint peeled away in strips like old skin, its porch sagged under years of weight and weather, and the windows seemed more like watchful eyes than openings. On this night, the house groaned under another storm, not of wind or rain, but of voices sharp and violent, cutting through the walls like jagged glass. Inside, Clara Monroe stood in the narrow kitchen, her body angled just enough to hide the fresh purple bruise blooming across her cheekbone. She was only in her early 30s, but her face carried a heaviness that belonged to someone much older. Once her brown eyes had been bright and curious. Now, dulled by years of exhaustion, they flickered with nothing but survival. Her chestnut hair, tangled and unwashed, was knotted into a careless bun, more out of necessity than choice. She had long stopped thinking about how she looked. Every ounce of energy went into simply enduring. The air reeked of stale smoke and spilled whiskey, a stench that clung to the curtains and carpet, seeping into her very skin. In her trembling hands, she clutched a dish towel, not to clean, but to hold, a fragile anchor in the storm that rolled through her home every night. At the center of that storm was Derek Monroe. Derek was a large man, his broad shoulders built. From years at the repair shop, his body hardened not by care but by anger and drink. His once boyish features had soured into something harsher. Bitterness carved into the lines of his face. His blonde hair, greasy and damp with sweat, stuck to his forehead as alcohol burned through his veins. Tonight, as too many nights before, he wore his shirt half untucked, a bottle dangling from one hand like a weapon. His words came slurred, but the venom inside them was sharp, deliberate, and familiar. "You're nothing, Clara," he spat, pacing the floor like a predator who had already cornered his prey. His shadow loomed across the peeling walls. "A parasite. Without me, you'd be begging on the street. Look at you, hiding behind those dead eyes, thinking you're better than me. You'll never be free of me." Clara stayed silent. She always did. It was not submission. It was survival. She had learned with painful clarity that every word spoken back was another strike earned. Her silence was armor. Her silence was strategy. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, forcing herself to keep her gaze steady. But her eyes betrayed her, flicking once toward the closed hallway door. Behind that thin piece of wood, her daughters sat in fear. Leah and Sophie Monroe were just 6 identical twins with golden hair that once shone like sunlight, now usually matted from neglect. Their wide brown eyes mirrored their mother's, though each carried a different weight. Leah's gaze, sharper, braver, Sophie's softer, quicker to fill with tears. Tonight, the two huddled together on their small bed, arms wrapped so tightly. Around each other, it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. The faded wallpaper of their room bore scratches and dents from nights before, tiny fists pounding at the door whenever their mother's cries had grown too loud to ignore. "Mama," Sophie whispered, pressing her ear against the wood, Her little voice cracking. "Please make him stop. Please," echoed Laya, trying to sound stronger than she felt. She squeezed her sister's hand, her lips trembling. "He'll get tired soon. We just have to wait." The words were meant to comfort, but even as she said them, hot tears slipped down her cheeks. On the other side of the wall, Derek's voice roared again. Then came a crash, the shatter of glass against the floor. Clara flinched, her whole body recoiling. In 3 unsteady strides, Derek closed the gap between them and grabbed her arm, yanking her forward with such force she nearly fell. His grip burned against her skin. "You think the neighbors don't hear?" he growled, his breath sour and hot in her face. "Let them hear. Let the whole damn town hear. No one's coming. No one cares." He shook her violently, the whiskey bottle clinking against the floorboards. His voice lowered, guttural, dangerous. "You belong to me, Clara. Don't ever forget it." Clara shut her eyes. She went still, willed her breathing to steady. For her daughters, for their safety, she endured. Each bruise became a shield, each silence a sacrifice. Fighting back would only bring more violence, and she could not risk that for the girls. Outside those frail walls, Ashwood stirred uneasily. Neighbors heard the shouts, but the town had long trained itself to look away. Curtains fluttered, lights dimmed, doors stayed locked. Whispers passed porch to porch, always the same excuse. It's their business, not ours. At the edge of town, Mrs. Harrove, a widow who lived 2 houses down, sat in her rocking chair. She heard the echoes of Clara's suffering, the same sounds she had heard for years. She shook her head, muttered a prayer under her breath, and turned her radio up to drown out the noise. "Poor girl," she whispered, but she too closed her door. Later, when Derek had finally slumped into his armchair, bottle slipping from his hand as snores rattled his chest, Clara moved like a shadow. She cleaned the broken glass, careful not to wake him, careful not to leave a shard for her daughter's small feet to find in the morning. Every step was calculated, quiet. She tapped gently at the locked door, a rhythm only Leia and Sophie knew. "It's me," she whispered. "Go to sleep now, my darlings. I'm still here." Inside, the twins pressed against the wood. "We love you, Mama," they whispered back. Their voices were muffled, fragile, but to Clara, they were everything. She leaned her bruised cheek against the door, closed her eyes, and let tears slide silently down. For her daughters, she would survive. For her daughters, she would bear anything. But somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered, a tiny, dangerous thought. That maybe one day somehow this could end. Outside, the town of Ashwood slept, content to ignore the nightmare inside that old house. But within its walls, 3, hearts beat in unison, refusing to surrender to despair. Clara held on to that rhythm, a quiet promise to herself. Her daughters would not grow up believing this was all life had to offer. The morning sun rose slowly over Ashwood, Montana, its pale gold light stretching across rooftops and spilling into the dry fields that framed the little town. The air was crisp, a sharp reminder that winter was drawing near. Fallen leaves tumbled and chased each other down the cracked sidewalks, restless in the breeze. Clara Monroe pulled her scarf higher, hiding the bruise on her face. She wore her long gray coat, frayed at the cuffs, and held tightly to the small hands of her daughters, Laya at her left, Sophie at her right. The girls walked in silence, each step heavy with unspoken fears. The streets were nearly empty, save for shopkeepers unlocking doors. Their polite nods lingered too long, their eyes saying what their mouths never dared. Clara wondered, not for the first time, how much they knew, how much they chose to ignore. The bruises, the shouting, the silence. And then, at the corner of Main and Willow Street, Clara froze. A patrol car waited beneath the shade of an elm tree. Its headlights dimmed. Beside it stood Officer Nathan Hale and his canine partner, Rex. Nathan was in his mid-30s, tall and lean, his stance marked by the discipline of years in uniform. His dark navy attire was crisp, his belt heavy with duty. His short black hair was flecked with gray at the temples, and his blue eyes, sharp and observant, carried the weight of a man who had seen more than he ever spoke of. At his side stood Rex, a sable and black German shepherd, his coat gleaming, his amber eyes locked with focus. The dog's ears pricked forward, his body poised, protective yet alert. Nathan's eyes scanned the street, every movement measured, every glance deliberate. Though he stood calmly, there was a tension in his posture, the kind of readiness that came from years of experience. His gaze moved from the empty storefronts to the few townsfolk shuffling past, then finally landed on Clara and the two small figures at her side. The sight tugged at something inside him. He noticed details others might have missed. The way Clara pulled her scarf higher when his eyes met hers. The way her shoulders hunched as though bracing for invisible blows. And the way the children clung to her hands with a desperation that went beyond the shyness of strangers. Rex, the German shepherd, shifted his weight, his ears twitching as his sharp nose caught the layers of scents the morning carried. Dust, leaves, damp earth from last night's dew, and something heavier, something human, like old smoke and stale liquor clinging faintly to the woman who now stood frozen at the corner. A low rumble vibrated in Rex's chest, not a growl of threat, but a sound of recognition, as though he sensed the hidden storm she carried with her. Nathan glanced down at his partner, reading him with the ease that only years of working together could give. Rex's alert stance, the slight rise of the fur along his shoulders, told Nathan that the dog sensed distress, even if no one else on the street seemed to notice. "Morning," Nathan said finally, his voice calm but steady, carrying the kind of authority that could either comfort or unsettle. He tipped his chin slightly in acknowledgement, not pressing too close, not wanting to spook her. Clara hesitated. Her instinct was to keep walking, to pull her daughters along, to avoid the weight of questions she feared might come. But something in Nathan's tone, something steady and patient, made her pause just for a heartbeat longer than she intended. Laya squeezed her mother's hand tightly, her wide eyes flicking to the officer, then down to Rex. The sight of the large shepherd made her chest tighten with both fear and fascination. Sophie, on the other side, shrank back a step, her small fingers clutching Clara's coat, whispering, "Mama," almost too quietly to hear. Nathan noticed. He noticed everything. The children's hesitation. The way Clara's lips pressed, into a thin line, holding back words she would never let slip in public. He didn't push. He simply stood, letting Rex sit at his side, the dog's amber eyes watching the little girls with a kind of quiet curiosity that was almost gentle. The silence stretched. A single leaf drifted down between them, landing on the cracked pavement. Clara finally lowered her gaze. She murmured a quiet, almost rehearsed, "Good morning, officer," her voice so faint it barely carried over the breeze. She tried to step forward, to pass him, to keep moving as though he were just another part of the town she had to navigate around. But Rex shifted again, taking one slow step forward. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply looked at Clara with a focus that unsettled her. It was as if the dog knew what she carried, knew what the girls had seen, knew the kind of fear that couldn't be hidden by scarves or silence. Nathan placed a hand lightly on Rex's shoulder, steadying him, though his own eyes remained fixed on Clara. He saw the bruise she tried to hide. He saw the shadows beneath her eyes. He saw the way the twins clung to her hands like lifelines, and though he said nothing more, Though Clara managed to lead her daughters past him without a word of protest, Nathan Hale did not look away. He turned slightly, watching as the three figures walked down the cracked sidewalk, their fragile silhouettes framed against the pale autumn sun. Beside him, Rex sat again, his ears pricked forward, eyes following the woman and her children until they disappeared around the corner. The shepherd's body remained tense, as though something inside him refused to let go. Nathan exhaled slowly. He had learned over the years that silence often told louder truths than words, and in that silence, he felt the weight of a story, waiting to be uncovered. Rex, as if in agreement, let out a soft huff through his nose, his gaze still fixed where Clara had been moments before. Kind of animal that saw more than people expected. The leash between man and dog looked almost unnecessary. They moved, as though bound by instinct more than rope. As Clara approached, Rex's body stiffened, his head tilted, nose quivering as if reading a story carried in the wind. Then came the bark, sharp, loud, insistent. The sound made Sophie stumble and cling to her mother's coat. L.A.'s fingers tensed in Clara's grasp. Clara froze. Her heart hammered. She tugged gently at her daughters, urging them forward, but Rex barked again, this time stepping toward them. With a low growl, his tail was high, not in aggression, but in fierce alertness, like a sentinel calling attention to a hidden truth. Nathan held the leash firmly, but did not tug Rex back immediately. Instead, his eyes narrowed slightly as he followed the line of his partner's gaze. First to Clara's scarf, the way it was wrapped too tightly, despite the mild weather. Then to Sophie, whose wide eyes brimmed with tears, and finally to Laya, whose stare was harder, sharper, but filled with something Nathan recognized all too well, fear disguised as defiance. "Good morning, ma'am," Nathan said, his voice even carrying no threat. "Heading to school?" Clara nodded quickly, her voice little more than a whisper. "Yes, officer." Nathan studied her for a moment longer. Rex gave another bark, pulling slightly on the leash, unwilling to let the family pass unnoticed. Nathan crouched beside the dog, his hand resting on Rex's back, murmuring something low. Rex quieted, but did not look away. His amber eyes remained locked on Clara's scarf, as though the dog could see past the fabric to the purple bloom hidden beneath. Nathan straightened, his gaze softer now, though his chest carried a familiar weight. He had seen that look before. The hurried steps, the silence of children too young to carry such heaviness. Years ago, his wife Allison had worn the same guarded eyes. She had called him one night, her voice broken, asking for help. By the time he arrived, it was too late. The man she had once trusted had turned his fists into weapons, and Nathan had walked into a crime scene that still haunted his dreams. Since then, every faint bruise, every timid glance from a child, every strange silence was more than coincidence to him. They were alarms ringing in his head. And Rex seemed to feel it too. The dog had been more than a partner. He had once saved Nathan's life. A year earlier, during a midnight raid on a meth lab hidden deep in the woods, Nathan had been cornered by two armed suspects. A shot rang out, grazing his side, dropping him to the ground. Rex had leapt from the shadows, his teeth sinking into the gunman's arm before the man could fire again. The second suspect fled, leaving Nathaniel because his partner had acted without hesitation. From that night forward, Nathan and Rex were bound not just by training, but by trust carved from survival. So when Rex barked at Clara and her daughters, Nathan did not dismiss it as nerves. His partner never barked without reason. "Beautiful morning," Nathan tried again, his voice gentle. "Your girls are lucky to have a mother who walks them to school." Clara's grip tightened on her daughter's hands. "Yes," she whispered, eyes fixed on the sidewalk. She wanted nothing more than to keep walking, to escape the scrutiny of both man and dog. She could feel the bruise throbbing beneath the scarf as if it were begging to be revealed. Sophie tugged at her mother's coat. "Mama," she whispered shakily, Heary's darting toward Rex. Clara hushed her with a soft pat, trying to coax calm. Nathan's gaze lingered on the children. Laya's shoulders were squared, too stiff for someone so small. She looked at him for only a second before glancing away. But in that second, he caught it. The flicker of fear that mirrored Allison's eyes on that final night. His throat tightened. Rex wheezed softly now, ears forward, tail lowering. The shepherd stepped closer, sniffing the air, and let out a low rumble as though trying to speak in his own way. Nathan placed a firm hand on his partner's neck, but he too could not ignore the message. "Ma'am," Nathan said carefully, "if you ever need anything, any help, you can find me at the station. Officer Hale, I'm there most days." Clara nodded quickly, murmured, "Thanks," and hurried the girls forward. They did not look back. Nathan stood there long after they disappeared around the corner. Rex sat at his side, ears twitching, eyes still, fixed on where they had gone. Nathan's jaw tightened. He wanted to follow, to demand answers. But he knew too well that trust could not be forced. The breeze rustled through the elm leaves above. For others, it was just another morning in Ashwood. For Nathan, it was something else entirely. A warning, a call to attention. He looked down at Rex, who stared back with unwavering eyes. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Nathan murmured. Rex gave a quiet bark, short and sure. Nathan exhaled, his hand resting on the dog's head. "All right, partner. We'll keep our eyes open." As he returned to his patrol car, the weight of old ghosts pressed harder against his chest. Allison's face flashed before him, the memory of her bruises, the sound of her broken voice. He had been too late once. He would not be too late again. The air outside Ashwood Elementary smelled faintly of chalk dust and cut grass, the kind of scent that marked the start of a school day in small towns. The school itself was a brick building with faded blue doors, its hallways decorated with cheerful posters about kindness and honesty, words that often rang hollow against the weight of children's unspoken stories. Inside, 6-year-old Leah Monroe sat at a low wooden desk in her first-grade art class. The room was bright, sunlight streaming through tall windows onto jars of paint, brushes and shelves stacked with construction paper. But despite the cheer, Isla's shoulders were hunched, her small fingers clutching a red crayon with more force than a child her age should know. The assignment was simple. Draw your family at home. Around her, other children sketched stick figures smiling under suns and rainbows. Some added dogs, siblings, houses with chimneys puffing smoke. But Laya's paper grew heavy with darker strokes. She drew a tall man with a square body, his hand clutching a bottle, scribbled in jagged brown. His mouth was open wide, red lines exploding outward like a shout. Beside him, she drew a smaller figure, a woman, her face colored with a blotch of purple, shoulders bent as if recoiling. Sitting at the desk beside her, Sophie watched with wide, worried eyes. Sophie's own page showed a shaky picture of herself, and Laya standing in front of a house with a slanted roof. She hadn't drawn their father at all. Sophie whispered, "Lila, don't draw him like that. Someone will see." But Laya kept coloring, her small jaw set with stubbornness, far older than her years. "Maybe someone needs to," she murmured. At the front of the class, Miss Jennifer Collins circled between desks. She was in her late 20s with a slim frame and shoulder-length blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Her eyes, hazel and attentive, carried warmth, but also the sharpness of someone who noticed details others overlooked. Miss Collins loved her students fiercely, often staying late to decorate the classroom or buy supplies with her own money when budgets fell short. When she reached Isla's desk, she stopped. The crayon in Isla's hand hovered over the page, and the drawing stared back at Miss Collins like assailant scream. She crouched down beside Laya, her tone careful. "That's quite a picture, Laya," she said, gently. "Can you tell me about it?" L.A. froze, her eyes darting to Sophie. Then she shook her head quickly, clutching the crayon so hard it nearly snapped. "It's just pretend," she whispered. Miss Collins smiled softly but didn't press. "All right," she said. "Pretend can still be very powerful." She rose slowly, carrying the weight of what she had seen in her chest. Later that afternoon, after the children were dismissed, Miss Collins lingered at her desk. The paper lay folded in her drawer, the jagged brown bottle still visible through the thin lines of the page. She debated with herself. Teachers in small towns often faced pressure not to interfere, to look the other way, but her instincts told her otherwise. That drawing was not imagination. It was memory. She walked briskly down the hall to the principal's office. Principal David Harper was a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and glasses that perched low on his nose. His reputation in Ashwood was that of a cautious leader, more concerned with keeping the school's name untarnished than stirring trouble. He looked up when Miss Collins entered, his expression wary. "Jennifer, something on your mind?" She placed the folded paper on his desk, her voice firm. "It's one of the Monroe girls. Laya, I think something is happening at home. You need to see this." Harper unfolded the drawing, his brows knitting. He exhaled slowly, pushing his glasses up. "That could be interpreted many ways." "It's not just the picture," Ms. Collins pressed. "It's her body language, the way Sophie clings to her. Their mother always has a scarf, even in warm weather." "I know what this looks like." Harper sighed, rubbing his temples. "Jennifer, these matters are delicate. Derek Monroe is known in town. Stirring accusations without proof could cause trouble." Miss Collins straightened her shoulders, her voice unwavering. "Then let there be trouble. Because if we stay quiet, those girls will pay the price." After a long pause, Harper reluctantly nodded. "I'll file a report to the district liaison, but keep this between us for now." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara sat at the small kitchen table, staring at her hands. She had heard from the girls how Ms. Collins had hovered by their desk, how Laya's drawing had been taken. Fear coiled inside Clara's chest, sharp and suffocating. She imagined Derek's rage if he found out. She walked into the bathroom and shut the door, locking it with trembling fingers. In the mirror, her scarf lay discarded, the bruise glaring back at her. She pressed a hand against the cold sink, her reflection fractured by a small crack in the glass. For years, she had endured, believing silence was safety. But now, silence threatened to expose them anyway. A thought, terrifying yet undeniable, began to grow. Perhaps she had to fight back. Perhaps she could not wait any longer. Her daughter's laughter drifted faintly from their room, Fragilea's glass. Clara closed her eyes, whispering, "I won't let this go on." It was the first time she admitted it aloud. Across town, Officer Nathan Hale sat at his desk in the dimly lit police station, paperwork scattered before him. Rex lay curled at his feet, ears flicking at every sound. Nathan's phone buzzed and he reached for it, expecting routine, but the caller ID read Ashwood Elementary. He answered, his voice calm. "Hale." It was Principal Harper's voice, cautious as ever. "Officer, I wanted to make you aware. One of our teachers raised concerns about the Monroe children. A drawing, some suspicions. Nothing confirmed yet, but I thought you should know." Nathan's pulse quickened. "Which child?" "Lela Monroe," Harper replied. Nathan closed his eyes. The image of Clara's scarf, the haunted look in Laya's gaze came back sharp as glass. He clenched his jaw, his knuckles whitening around the phone. "Thank you for telling me. I'll keep an eye on it." After ending the call, Nathan sat back heavily. Memories flooded him. Allison's last night, the phone call he hadn't answered in time, her voice begging, "Please, Nathan, just listen." He had listened too late. He looked down at Rex, who now lifted his head, sensing the shift in his partner's heartbeat. Nathan whispered, voice rough, "We can't miss this one. Not again." Rex wed softly, resting his muzzle on Nathan's boot, as if promising he would not let Nathan fight alone. The Monroe house creaked under the weight of another autumn evening. Wind pressed against the thin window panes, carrying with it the rustle of brittle leaves, but inside the walls the storm was of another kind. The air smelled of whiskey and sweat, sharp and oppressive. Clara Monroe stood near the kitchen table, her body tense, her breath shallow. The familiar dread clung to her bones, for she knew the rhythm of nights like this. Derek Monroe stumbled in. From the garage, a half-empty bottle in his hand. His shirt was wrinkled and stained with grease, his blonde hair matted against his forehead. The glare in his bloodshot eyes was sharper than the shards of glass he had broken so many times before. He was a tall man with a broad frame, the kind of physical presence that once promised protection, but had long since twisted into terror. "You think you're better than me?" Derek's voice cracked like a whip, echoing off the peeling wallpaper. "You're nothing but a parasite, a leech. Without me, you and those brats would starve in the street." He slammed the bottle down onto the counter. It tipped, spilling amber liquid across the wood, dripping onto the floor. Clara flinched as Derek swung his arm toward the wall, knocking a picture frame down. The glass shattered across the linoleum, scattering like tiny knives. Clara's cheek throbbed with the memory of other nights, other strikes. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears only fueled him. Her silence enraged him, but it was her only shield. Derek leaned closer, his breath hot, laced with whiskey. "Look at you," he snarled. "A pathetic woman no one wants. You'll never escape me." He shoved her shoulder roughly, sending her stumbling against the table. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from outside, neighbors enjoying a late evening. None of them would come. None of them ever had. In the bedroom down the narrow hall, Laya and Sophie huddled together on their small bed. The door locked from the outside. Their small bodies trembled as the crash of glass and the growl of their father's voice reached them. Sophie pressed her face into her sister's shoulder, whispering, "Please, Laya, make it stop." Laya bit her lip until it hurt. She wanted to be strong to protect her sister, but she was only 6. All she could do was listen, heart pounding, wishing for morning. Hours crawled. Derek's shouts grew less coherent, his movements slower. Finally, his body slumped into the armchair in the living room, the bottle slipping from his fingers to roll across the carpet. His snores began heavy and guttural. Clara, her body still rigid, listened for several long minutes, making sure the rhythm of his sleep was real. When she was certain, she moved quietly. Every creak of the floor felt like a gunshot in the silence, but she kept going. She padded down the hall to the locked door and tapped gently in a pattern only her daughters knew. From inside, the twins stirred. "It's me," Clara whispered through the thin crack. "Don't be afraid, Mama." Sophie whimpered softly. "We heard him. We heard everything." Clara rested her forehead against the door, her voice trembling but firm. "Listen to me, my loves. I promise you one day soon I will take you away from this. We will be free of him." There was silence. Then Laya's small voice choked with tears. "Mama, are you sure? Can we really escape?" Clara closed her eyes, feeling the sting of tears she had not allowed in years. She pressed her palm against the wood as if she could reach them through it. "Yes, I promise you with all my heart, I will not let him break us." For the first time, her words were not only comfort, but a vow. When the girls finally lay back down, clinging to each other, Clara moved into the kitchen. Her hands shook, but her resolve had never been steadier. From beneath the sink, hidden inside an old cleaning bucket, she pulled out two small items wrapped in a rag. Months earlier, on a rare errand alone, she had bought them in secret from a hardware store in a nearby town. Tiny cameras disguised as ordinary household objects. She had hidden them away, too afraid to use them, too afraid of what might happen if Derek ever discovered them. But tonight, after the teacher's suspicion at school and the weight of Laya's whispered question, she knew hesitation was no longer possible. The first device was disguised within the frame of a wall clock. Clara climbed onto a chair, careful not to make noise, and swapped it with the old clock above the kitchen door. Her heart raced as she adjusted the hands, ensuring it ticked as usual. The lens was nearly invisible, a watchful eye now overlooking the room where Derek's rages so often erupted. The second was hidden within a ceramic vase, one of the few decorations Derek hadn't smashed. Clara placed it back on the shelf in the living room, angling it just so. From that vantage, it could capture the violence, the evidence no one in Ashwood dared acknowledge. She stood back, breath shallow, staring at her work. For years, she had been only a victim, silent and waiting. Now, she had taken the first step, toward defiance. In their bedroom, the twins whispered in the dark. Laya stared at the ceiling, eyes wet, her small fists gripping the blanket. "Did you hear, Mama?" she asked softly. Sophie nodded, her face still pressed against her sister's shoulder. "She promised." "But what if he finds out?" Isla's voice cracked. "What if he hurts her worse?" Sophie's lips trembled. "Mama wouldn't lie," she said. "We'll leave. We have to believe her." The girls lay together, uncertain, but holding on to hope. Tiny embers glowing against the darkness. Clara returned to the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron as though she could erase the fear. Still clinging to her skin, she looked toward the armchair where Derek snored, oblivious, and whispered to herself, "You will not destroy us." For the first time in years, she felt a spark of power, fragile yet undeniable. The bruises remained. The fear was real, but the vow she had made to her children now lived in the hidden eyes of the house itself. The cameras ticked silently with the clock, recording the truth that would one day set them free. The following morning in Ashwood was sharp with the kind of autumn chill that made breath visible in small puffs. Clara Monroe walked quickly, head low beneath a gray scarf wrapped tightly across her bruised face, one hand clutching Laya's shoulder, the other guiding Sophie by the wrist. Both girls were bundled into faded coats, too thin for the cold, their shoes scuffed and soles worn through. They looked like shadows hurrying to blend into the crowd. But Rex, the sable-coated German shepherd, noticed. He pulled at his lead the moment Clara turned the corner with the twins. His dark fur caught the morning light and his ears twitched forward. A deep warning growl rumbled in his chest before it erupted into sharp, persistent barks that echoed down the street. Officer Nathan Hale tightened his grip on the leash, frowning. His tall frame, clad in the navy blue uniform that bore the Ashwood police badge, stood rigid. His eyes, storm gray and wary, darted from Rex to Clara. "Easy, boy," he muttered. But Rex wouldn't be calmed. The dog's focus locked on Clara and the children, his stance tense as if he were shielding them. Clara froze mid-step, her breath catching. Sophie clung tighter to her mother's side, and Laya half hid behind the scarf's trailing edge. Rex barked again, insistent, almost desperate. Nathan's instincts flared. Years on the force, coupled with memories etched into his bones, told him that his partner never reacted without reason. He glanced at Clara, noticing the bruise poorly concealed under the scarf. The way she flinched even when no one touched her, the fear flickering in her daughter's eyes. "Mrs. Monroe," Nathan called out gently, his voice careful, low, steady. "Would you mind stopping for a moment? There's something we need to clarify." Clara hesitated, lips parting but no sound emerging. Sophie began to whimper softly and Laya squeezed her hand. Nathan adjusted his tone, more official now, though still kind. "It's a standard procedure, ma'am. We need to confirm some paperwork at the station. It won't take long." The word station made Clara's chest tighten. She glanced quickly around as if Derek might spring out from any doorway, but Nathan's eyes held hers. Not demanding, not threatening, simply steady. And Rex, now whining, instead of barking, had lowered himself beside the twins, nudging Sophie's small hand with his wet nose. For the first time, the girl let out a shaky giggle, as if sensing protection in the dog's nearness. Clara nodded faintly. "All right," she whispered. The police station in Ashwood was a squat red brick building near the town square, its lobby warmed by the smell of old coffee and paper. Nathan led them to a quiet interview room, its walls lined with filing cabinets, a pot of dusty fake ivy on the windowsill. He offered the children chairs, sliding them closer together so they wouldn't feel alone. Sophie sat rigidly at first, tiny hands clenched in her lap. Laya leaned against her, whispering comfort. Nathan crouched before them, his uniform creasing, at the knees. His face softened, and he spoke in a tone he once used with his niece years ago, before tragedy hollowed his family. "You're safe here," he told them. "Rex and I won't let anything happen to you." The twins exchanged a look. For a moment, it was as if Clara didn't exist in the room. The children's eyes clung to the tall officer and the faithful dog sitting at his side. Then Sophie's dam broke. Tears streamed down her cheeks and her small voice quivered. "Daddy locks. Us in the room? Every night he yells at Mommy, he hurts her?" Clara pressed a trembling hand to her lips, unable to silence her daughter this time. Laya's eyes brimmed too, but she whispered fiercely, "Stop, Sophie, please!" Nathan's chest ached. He swallowed hard, nodding gently at Sophie, not pushing further. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. Clara sat across from him, shoulders hunched, scarf sliding from her bruised cheek. For years, she had bitten her tongue, hidden the truth. But Sophie's words had dripped the final veil away. She looked down at her coat pocket, her fingers tightening around the small, hard object hidden. There. The decision she had wrestled with in sleepless nights now loomed, her heart hammered, fear whispering Derek's rage if he ever discovered her betrayal. But another voice rose stronger, Illa's whispered plea, Sophie's tears, her own vow murmured, through the door crack. "I promise I'll get you out." Slowly, she drew out the USB stick wrapped in tissue. Her hand shook as she set it on the table. Her voice was almost inaudible. "This is from the cameras inside our house." Nathan's brows knit, his breath catching. He picked up the device with careful hands, like handling something sacred. Plugging it into the station's computer, he clicked open the files. The screen came alive with shaky footage. The living room appeared, lit by the flickering lamp. Derek Monroe, broad-shouldered and slurring, staggered into frame, bottle in hand. His voice, hoarse sorrow, venomous, filled the speakers. "You're nothing, Clara. Nothing but a parasite." The video showed the bottle hurled across the room, shattering against the wall. Derek lunged, arm raised. Clara's figure cowered, shielding her head as blows fell. The children's muffled cries filtered faintly from behind a door in the background. Nathan's stomach turned. His hands, usually steady, trembled on the mouse. The images blurred as old memories surged. His late wife, Emily, eyes wide with silent pleas. Her bruises dismissed by neighbors and ignored until it was too late. He had failed her once. The guilt had haunted him every day since. Now, as Clara's suffering played before him, he felt the past and present collide. His jaw tightened, a vow igniting in his chest. Not again. Never again. The silence after the video stopped was heavy. Clara's eyes glistened, braced for judgment, for disbelief. Instead, Nathan closed the laptop firmly, his voice low but resolute. "This is enough," he said. "Enough to protect you. To stop him." Rex, sensing the charged air, padded closer to the twins. The dog pressed his warm body against Sophie's legs, letting her bury her small hands in his thick fur. Laya leaned down, too, resting her cheek on his back. Their breathing slowed, steadied. For the first time, they looked less like frightened captives, and more like children. Children allowed to feel safe, even briefly. Nathan looked at the scene. Two little girls comforted by his loyal partner. A mother shaking, but brave enough to hand over her truth. He felt something loosen inside him, a fragment of his own broken promise piecing itself together. He straightened, turning to Clara. "You've done the hardest part," he said. "You're not alone anymore." Clara met his gaze, still clouded with fear, but beneath it flickered something new. Hope, fragile, but alive. The crisp air of late autumn hung heavy over Ashwood that morning, the small Montana town blanketed in a thin veil of mist. Officer Nathan Hale stood beside his patrol SUV, the early sunlight catching in his dark hair now threaded with the faintest streaks of silver. His face was taut with resolve. Beside him, Rex, the sable-coated German shepherd, sturdy and poised, paced with restrained energy, his ears pry-cricked and body alert, as though he sensed the gravity of the day ahead. Today was not another routine patrol. Today, justice would finally breathe within the Monroe household. Nathan's voice was steady as he briefed the small team of officers gathered in the gravel driveway just a few houses down from Clara's home. "We go in calm but ready," he said, scanning their faces. "Derek Monroe has a record of resisting. He's volatile,